Thank you very much indeed. One of the most thoughtful of contemporary British writers on religious affairs today, Chief Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, by the way, someone who probably does support the idea of faith schools, has observed that religion is fire. It warms, but it also burns. And religious people, he suggests, are what he calls the guardians of the flame. Few would deny that religions are capable of promoting goodness and peace and virtue, but also of terrible disharmony and evil. And those who claim to be religious believers certainly have their work cut out in trying to direct that flame of which Rabbi Sacks speaks to good purpose. Religion in education and in schooling seems to me to be no less capable of those opposites, intentionally or otherwise, and it can all too easily tend towards the more negative end of the spectrum. It's not my intention or purpose to attack the motives, the altruism, or the quality of religious schools or those who teach in them. On the contrary, I have great respect for many of the schools and the teachers there, and I count many of the latter as friends and colleagues. Good schools, and some not so good, can be found in all sectors of education. The problems that I perceive lie particularly in some of the unintended outcomes of those who wish for religiously separate schools, or in the often naive but inappropriate motives of those who see schooling as an opportunity for the promotion of religious belief. What are those problems? Well, separation itself seems to me to be the most disadvantageous factor. Those who insist on separate religious schools for themselves are, of course, imposing it on others, whether they are religious or not. Those who don't want it, especially in a situation like Northern Ireland, where that separation still remains about 90% effective. The results of that separation are evident at all levels in this society, as Les has already pointed out. A lack of knowledge about each other's beliefs and traditions, which may often be innocent rather than malicious, but it's still unhelpful in building up the cohesion which any society needs, not least this one. Sometimes a positive and willful ignorance that expresses itself in stereotyping and prejudice and can all too quickly become sectarianism or racist behaviour. When we do not have enough opportunity to encounter the other, how can we really learn to value and respect difference? Worryingly, I believe that there are too many teachers who are the products and perhaps the greatest victims of that separation, and I meet quite a few of them through my work. And this makes it far more difficult for those teachers to encourage the necessary greater openness in future generations. We're also becoming increasingly aware at a time of falling school roles of the economic consequences of having two schools where one would do. Some in the churches and the other faith communities, of course, often speak of their commitment to being multicultural and inclusive, even in their separate schools. But genuine as this may be, it's extremely difficult to do this in any substantive manner, especially through inter-school work, with which, by the way, I've been heavily involved personally, and there is simply a serious danger of superficiality and tokenism, which ultimately gets that reconciliation in society, makes it harder to achieve. Separate schooling makes the task of religious education much harder, and not only in faith schools. I believe that there is a very good case for genuinely inclusive religious learning in schools, but this has to be very clearly distinguished from religious instruction or faith nurture. Instruction and nurture are tasks for the faith communities themselves. They're not responsibilities that should be handed over to publicly funded schools that should be catering for people of all faiths and those who are not religious. Separate religious education and separate schools simply muddy the water and makes that distinction much harder to comprehend. But should schools be religiously neutral? I confess to having a difficulty with this word, even though it is included in the motion for which I'm speaking. Education isn't value-free. I much prefer the concept of shared schools. Schools that are varied, diverse, inclusive, respectful of difference, not bland and grey. I don't really want neutral schools in the sense of neutered schools, any more than I want a neutral society in Northern Ireland. I want a shared society, shared schools, but to be genuinely shared, there must be awareness, fairness, equality, balance, and mutual respect. Religious communities can be partners in such sharing, but if they insist on separation, they'll most likely become opponents of it, intentionally